Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. And Jim, we hope everyone rested up over the weekend. Hopefully this week won't be quite as draining and exhausting and maddening as last week. Not making any promises. It very well could be, especially towards the end of the week. And we've got plenty of badness and craziness to talk about today, so let's at least start with the good. And I know there were quite a few people, and I was probably one of them, at least to some extent, who was a little bit frustrated with Rachel Mitchell's questioning of Dr. Christine Ford on Thursday, wondering why there wasn't more discussion of her allegation from the early 1980s and less about the process of what happened here over the past few months. But as it turns out, in her report to the Senate Judiciary Committee, she found quite a few different inconsistencies in Ford's testimony. And you list them with bullet points in the Morning Jolt today. Just a few of them. Ford said the assault occurred in the mid-1980s in a July 6 text to the Washington Post. By September, she told the paper that it occurred in the summer of 1982. She refused to provide any notes from her therapist to the committee. The notes of the therapist described in the Post article say that 4 boys were in the room when she was assaulted. Ford says the therapist made an error. In her letter to Feinstein, Ford said me and 4 others were at the party. Testifying before the committee, she said the party had herself, Leland Kaiser, and 4 boys, but that she can only remember the names of 3 of them. Then there's questions about what she said in the polygraph in August. And then, of course, there's the questions about how she got her lawyer and whether or not her lawyers ever explained to her that the committee was willing to come out and get her statement out in California so she didn't have to go through the spectacle of testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And her memory's not that good in the short term either because she couldn't remember the date of the polygraph or whether she was recorded. So, Jim, it's probably going to be sexist in the minds of some to point out the fact that her story has changed. What do you make of the fact that Rachel Mitchell obviously dug in enough to find a lot of problems here?
Greg, I think they have to adjust the slogan. It now has an asterisk. It says, believe all women except Rachel Mitchell. So, look, no individual indiscrepancy or contradiction in the accounts of Christine Blasey Ford by themselves means that she's lying. However, the more gaps in memory, the more things that contradict, the more times the story changes, the more people will begin to ask, okay, is this a credible witness? Is this someone whose memory we can put a lot of faith in and we can take it to the bank and we have absolute 100% assurance over this when there are other, areas of that incident that she does not recall? Every once in a while, everyone will quote back to me what turned into, I don't know, it was Geraghty's slogan or Geraghty's maxim or something like that. They know all statements from Barack Obama come with an expiration date, all of them. But a couple of years ago, I wanted to actually start a more serious and more generally applicable one that unfortunately never quite caught on. But it was basically people do not withhold exculpatory evidence. People do not have information that will help their side of the story, that will verify their claims, that will exonerate them of accusations, things like that. People don't hold on to it and wait for just the right moment to reveal it very much. Most of the time, when you hear about these sorts of things, it turns out like Al Capone's vault and Geraldo. There's always this rumor of this great evidence that's coming out. And we can point to 2 different examples of this over this past weekend, Greg. The first, I remember, just to bring on one of our favorite topics, Beto O'Rourke, the Senate candidate down in Texas, said that he had a witness. He was traveling with someone the night of the infamous car accident who he talked to, he reached out to, he had not spoken to in many years. And this person said, no, he did not attempt to leave the scene of an accident. So Beto O'Rourke, with his high blood alcohol content, tells us he is 100% certain that he remembers accurately that he did not attempt to leave the scene of the accident, and he has a witness. Unfortunately, Greg, this witness does not want to come forward. So the police are lying. The police report is lying. The witness quoted in the police report is lying. Beto O'Rourke, I've got exculpatory evidence, but I just can't show it to you. That's what people were calling the "I have a girlfriend in Canada" explanation from then. In this case, in the case of Christine Blasey Ford, I was surprised to learn that she did not provide her notes from her therapist to the committee. I think it's safe to say that if those notes verified what she's saying now, they would be in the hands of the committee, and in fact, they'd be released to the whole public. Now, we know that she showed at least some of them to the Washington Post, but one of the things that came out under questioning, which was kind of interesting, is she can't recall whether she showed all of them or only some of them to the Washington Post. And she cannot recall whether she kind of summarized those therapist notes and shared them with the Washington Post, or whether she showed the notes themselves. Now, this is not 30-some years ago. This is roughly 3 months ago that she can't remember what she did. Now, look, according to the Washington Post reporting of those notes, she said there were 4 boys in the room when she was assaulted initially. Ford says the therapist made an error. That very well could have happened. But then we have the problem, which she said in her letter to Feinstein. She says, me and 4 others were at the party testifying before the committee. Now she says there were herself, Leland Kaiser, who is a woman, and 4 boys. That adds to 6. She can only remember 3 names of the boys. In the statement there are several contradictions between her testimony and her statement to the polygrapher. To the polygrapher, she said P.J. Smith was a bystander. She did not list Leland Kaiser in her statement to the polygrapher, which seems like a very odd omission. Then when testifying to the committee, she said P.J. Smith was not in the room and did not witness the attack, and thus it was not accurate to describe him as a bystander. But again, that's what she said in her own statement to the polygrapher. The other little things which, easily overlooked in the course of all the drama on Thursday. Greg, she said she did not, she reached out to the Washington Post and not to the Senate Judiciary Committee or to her senators because she, quote, did not know how to contact her senator. That sounds very odd. She also didn't remember the date of the polygraph or whether she was video or audio recorded. And again, this is mere months ago. This is not ancient history. This is not going back decades or something like that. There's a lot of criticism of Rachel Mitchell on Thursday. I think everyone would agree the 5 minutes time limit, probably was less than perfect, and in fact, probably pretty frustrating time constraint to operate under. But what she has done here in the document, I urge everyone to go take a look. It's floating around the internet. It's put a link to it up in the Morning Jolt newsletter. All it does is lay out what Christine Blasey Ford said in each iteration, and it changes. And this is the sort of thing that makes for a troubling witness if their account of what happened that night, not only does it lack several basics of when it happened and where it happened, the sort of things that could help the accused establish an alibi, it also has several changes about who was there, where they were, and things like that. We'll see how this shakes out, but I think Rachel Mitchell ended up doing a much better job than people believed she had around midday Thursday or so.
Jim, you mentioned Barack Obama in passing there, and I just want to offer this parallel to Democrats who are so sure that this actually happened or something very close to it. Believe it or not, we're almost at the 10-year mark since Obama got elected. It's about a month away. But let's pretend it's late October 2008. Obama's ahead. He's beating John McCain. And all of a sudden, a girl from a different high school in Honolulu accuses Obama of attempted assault with no evidence. She names witnesses, but they have no memory of anything that actually happened. The accuser scrubs social media. We find out, though, that this accuser is a Republican donor and a possible activist on certain issues and is represented by highly activist conservative lawyers. And then also claims that Obama was either stoned or coked up, both of which he admitted to doing in high school, and that's why he might not remember actually doing it. That would be dismissed out of hand by the media. I think it would be dismissed out of hand, obviously, by the Democrats and hopefully by most Republicans. But the flip side is what we're being asked to believe here.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it, Greg. I think what the problem, look, at the core of all of this is this idea that a lot of people on the left believe that people on the left are good people, and they would not do such a thing. A lot of people on the left believe that people on the right are bad people, and that not only would they do such a thing, they probably did such a thing. They basically believe the accusation, and it's up to the accused to prove that it didn't happen, that they judge the opposition by a very different standard than they judge allies on their own side. Oh, by the way, I think you do see some of this on the right as well. If an allegation like that came out, you probably would see people on the right reporting that a month before Election Day, Greg. It'd probably be the same people who said that, Barack Obama was a Kenyan secret agent, or that he was, the real Obama was born in Hawaii, but there was a clone that was, generated in a vat in Kenya somewhere, all that kind of nonsense. So, yeah, you're going to get partisans on both sides. I do think there's a near uniform discussion amongst our the mainstream media, and if that term has ever seemed less accurate, this is it. This is the day. Claiming that basically putting all of the burden of proof on Brett Kavanaugh to prove his innocence, and basically believing that everything Ford said is accurate, even though there already are now several demonstrated contradictions there.
The bad martini, of course, is Jeff Flake and his little maneuver along with Chris Coons on Friday that postpones the final confirmation vote on Brett Kavanaugh to be a Supreme Court justice. Mitch McConnell was hoping to have that vote tomorrow, but Flake made his yes vote contingent on an effort to have a week-long FBI investigation into these allegations. Chuck Grassley ultimately backed him up with Mitch McConnell, who didn't have the votes otherwise, so he backed it up and sent it over to President Trump, who also doesn't have the votes otherwise, so he ordered this FBI investigation to last no more than a week. So here's Jeff Flake explaining on 60 Minutes last night why he just couldn't let it go forward without some strings attached.
I don't think anybody expected what happened on Friday to happen. And I can't say that I did either. I just knew that we couldn't move forward, that I couldn't move forward without hitting the pause button because what I was seeing, experiencing in an elevator and watching it in committee and just thinking this is ripping our country apart.
So clearly the answer to something ripping our country apart is to have at least a week more of it, if not more. You had a lot of Democratic senators in the hearings with the committee and otherwise saying, look, they just did a 2-day investigation with Thomas and Hill back in 1991. What can it hurt? 7 days should be more than enough. So now we actually get the 7-day FBI investigation. And shockingly, Jim, the Democrats are not happy with that. Chris Murphy, not on the committee, but a senator from Connecticut, Democrat, of course, tweets out, yes, of course there should be an FBI investigation. But whatever they find doesn't change the fact that Kavanaugh, especially after his performance yesterday, is the most dangerous Supreme Court pick of our lifetime. Over at ABC This Week, George Stephanopoulos asking Mazie Hirono if it's a legit FBI investigation.
From what you've learned about the FBI investigation, will it be a credible investigation?
That's going to be the big outstanding question. And I would think that Jeff Flake and the other senators who are going for this investigation will call for. There's time, The thing is that every Senate vote matters, and there's time to get to the bottom of it. Even if it's 7 days, that's bad enough. But then to limit the FBI as to the scope and who they're going to question, that really, I wanted to use the word farce, but that's not the kind of investigation that all of us are expecting the FBI to conduct.
Then you got Deborah Katz, attorney for Dr. Ford, saying a thorough FBI investigation is critical to developing all the relevant facts. Dr. Ford welcomes this step in the process and appreciates the efforts of Senators Flake, Murkowski, Manchin, and Collins, and all other senators who have supported an FBI investigation to ensure it is completed before the Senate votes on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, but then finishes by saying no artificial limits as to time or scope should be imposed on this investigation. They're all referring to the fact that in pushing for this investigation, the Republicans said it should be limited to existing credible accusations so as to head off more Michael Avenattis and so forth. Jim, what do you make of the shifting goalposts here?
I really love how the senator says, I don't want to use the word farce, so I'm going to use it in an interview on national television. Greg, the title of today's Morning Jolt is Jeff Flake is a Sucker. And there are a lot of people who are denouncing him in the most furious tones. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he genuinely believed he was going to do some good this way, that the Democrats were screaming that they're, how can you go forward with this without an FBI investigation? All right, here's an FBI investigation. I take away the objection you had. For Murkowski, for Collins, if they had any doubt, you know what? We're going to have the FBI look into this. Let's see what happens. If they find something, they're going to do some more interviews. Let's see what they come up with. I think he genuinely believed that he would get more credit for this. And that everyone would say, oh, thank goodness, this isn't just being rushed through in a partisan manner. We're getting the FBI investigation, and this will settle this issue. The problem is that the people who were calling, at least some of the, and I would argue a considerable portion of the Senate Democrats who were calling for an FBI investigation, who were doing so in bad faith, because there is no FBI investigation that will ever get them to say, oh, okay, I guess these accusations are unfounded. I guess these, the fact that there are no corroborating witnesses and all of these holes in Ms. Ford's memory and different parts there that don't seem to add up. I guess Kavanaugh has been wrongly accused. My apologies. I vote for him to be on the Supreme Court. All of these people announced their opposition to him. Like a good chunk of the senators announced their opposition to him like the night he was named. All right. There's no chance they're getting to yes. Now the question is, will any of them go as far as to say they don't think he did this? And I bet you not a single Senate Democrat will come out and go forth and do this. I think a good measuring stick of their lack of good faith is that, as far as I can tell, not a single Senate Democrat has come forward and says, I've looked at the claims by Michael Avenatti's client. The idea that starting at age 15, Brett Kavanaugh started organizing these massive gang rape parties going on in the Washington, D.C. area, and that he did it once a week for about a period of 3 years, that girls from Maryland who were in college were coming to these parties. They were being assaulted. They were continuing to go to these parties after being assaulted, that there were dozens of assailants, dozens of witnesses, and not a single one of them ever went to the cops, ever went to their parents, ever went to a teacher or any other responsible adult. I'd just like to see one Senate Democrat say, that really sounds very implausible to me. Instead, we're getting Democrats complaining that they aren't looking into this, despite the what strikes me as the glaring contradictions in this. I guess you could say I saw Nate Silver say, hey, if Avenatti's got witnesses for this sort of claim, he should start generating them. And, here we are. It came out with them. What was it, Thursday, Greg, they came out with this? Was it Wednesday?
It was the day before the hearing. Yeah, probably Wednesday.
Wednesday. All right. So it's Monday. He's had 4 or 5 days to come up with any other witnesses, because apparently there'd be dozens and dozens of them. He has not done so, but he has gotten a Showtime interview for his client, which, of course, featured him front and center as well. So, look, the fact that Democrats are so unwilling to call out anybody on their side for bad faith accusations, anybody on their side for muddying the waters or for tactics like this. Look, Jeff Flake is looking for a bipartisan, consensus happy ending that just isn't going to happen here. And I think he's kind of foolish for doing so. Look, if the FBI comes back and says, first of all, if the FBI comes back and says, oh, yeah, we found credible evidence to back up these claims, I'll concede it'll be a very different discussion then. That all of a sudden, if you come back and you say, oh, yeah, we found new witnesses who corroborate the claims, we found indisputable evidence, if there's something there that makes you say, okay, then this is a different conversation. But based on what we know now, this looks like an organized smear campaign to ruin the good name of a good judge who's been doing this for years. Every single person coming out of the woodwork right now had the opportunity to come out in 2006 when he was being confirmed to be a federal judge. Nobody seemed to think it was important then. Nobody seemed to think this is worth raising then. But now all of a sudden, every Yale classmate, every high school classmate's coming out and saying, oh, no, I remember him he was an axe murderer. I think he's the Zodiac killer. So anyway, that's where we are, Greg. And it's deeply frustrating. I hope Jeff Flake is happy, because we've got another 6 or 7 days of this probably. And my guess is that it will change absolutely nothing when all is said and done.
I think the Democrats have even given up on any corroboration of the actual story on any of these accounts. All they're looking for now is for one person at Yale or in high school to say that Kavanaugh passed out, and therefore his memory is suspect, so therefore his denial is suspect, and that they're going to run with that if they can actually find someone to say that. Let's move on to the crazy martini now, and away from the Kavanaugh situation for a bit. President Trump spent last week mostly at the opening of the UN General Assembly, which is normally a story that is highly, highly covered. Gave a speech last week that, for the most part, was quite good from a conservative standpoint. He did say at one point he's accomplished more already than most administrations in history, and some of the other delegates laughed, and so, of course, that's the only line that most of the media covered. But then at the end of the week, on Saturday, he was at a rally in West Virginia, mainly for Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, as he tries to unseat Joe Manchin. He's got an uphill climb to do that in the West Virginia Senate race. But as he was doing what he does at these rallies, Trump was talking about the progress he thinks he's making with Kim Jong-Un and North Korea. And here's part of what he said.
I was really being tough, and so was he. And we would go back and forth, and then we fell in love, okay? No, really. He wrote me beautiful letters, and they're great letters. We fell in love.
Obviously, Trump's got a rhetorical flourish, Jim, especially at these rallies where he's kind of off the cuff more than he normally is. But just try to put yourself in a position where if it's Obama, how he would have reacted, even George W. Bush, how he reacted when he claimed to see into Putin's soul, to say now that he fell in love with Kim Jong-Un, who we just reported a few weeks ago, hasn't actually stopped much of anything with this nuclear program. But he thinks by buttering up Trump, he's going to get away with what he wants to. That seems to be working. And the North Korean demand now is essentially, we'll denuclearize when you do, President Trump. So he hasn't actually gotten much done, but at least he's got a new buddy.
For everyone who wants to say, look, get off Trump's back. We all know he didn't really mean it. Okay, what did he mean then? Like this is one of the things that the problems that arise when you have a president who speaks so often off the cuff. He's feeding off the crowd. He's enjoying himself. And he goes for a bit of comic hyperbole. Okay, all right, I'm willing to grant that Donald Trump and Kim Jong-Un are not literally in love with each other. This is not the beginning of a whirlwind and extraordinarily awkward romance between these men. But I would really like to know, in that context, Mr. President, do you trust Kim Jong-Un? Do you believe? I'm glad he's sending all these lovely letters with flowery language and all that kind of stuff. Do you believe that he's keeping his word? Are you seeing things that indicate he's keeping his word? There are certain things we can measure, i.e., missile launches and nuclear detonations and things like that. But when he says he's dismantling his facilities, are you seeing it? Are you seeing the same thing on satellites? Are the South Koreans seeing it? Let's get some more verification in those stuff. In the end, how the leader and dictator of North Korea feels about the American president and how the American president feels about the North Korean dictator isn't nearly as important to the relationships between the two countries than compared to, say, the status of the nuclear program, how many nuclear warheads they have, how advanced their ICBM systems are, any saber rattling they're doing to South Korea. Like that's the stuff that really matters, right? And it's interesting. I remember this back when I was over in Turkey. This is now more than 10 years ago. There was all this talk of, Erdogan and George W. Bush don't get along very well. And I remember thinking, look, the U.S. military and the Turkish military had a lot of close ties, diplomatic, intelligence. They were still working together. Turkey was pretty good on the war on terror back then. I think we can we can argue about how well they are these days. The relationships between country to country, can they be shaped by the personal relationship between two leaders? Yes, they definitely can be. But in the end, leaders come and go, right? I mean, the relationship between two countries shouldn't be quite so dependent upon two leaders of the country. So in the end, I'm glad that Trump and Kim Jong-Un, I don't care if they do a buddy cop movie together or, road movies or something like that. I'm glad. But in the end, that's not really what the problem with North Korea is. The problem with North Korea is a, paranoid, despotic, kleptocratic, brutal regime, nuclear weapons, and a general attitude of saber rattling and threatening their neighbors whenever they don't get what they want. And the fact that the president seems to kind of shrug this off is deeply frustrating. I'm not going to give him too much grief about comic hyperbole, but without the other progress on all these other fronts, it's a little frustrating to see terms like falling in love throwing around to each other.
Yeah, it was just, 8 months ago that we had the guy holding up his crutches at the State of the Union. And I think that was very effective in getting Kim to make certain concessions, releasing the prisoners and greasing the skids for the meeting in Singapore. But as you said here, the big goal is to eradicate the nuclear threat and short of that, at least severely de-escalate it. What a Monday, Jim. I'm sure the rest of the week will be smooth as silk.
Today's been a long week, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And be sure to tune in again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.